Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Convocation in February, Black History Month. And we have a photograph, a rare photograph of Dr. King, courtesy of Norm Thomas here. Oh, May. Oh, thank you. Courtesy of May. Where is May? Is she here today in spirit?
Her photograph is here to represent.
Her photograph. Sandy, why don't you just come up here? My name is Charles Svensson. I'm a resident here, and we welcome you to this convocation. We are glad that you are here. We welcome all those at home watching us via the waves. We are going to begin this afternoon by singing hymn number 339, Lift Up Every Voice, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And we usually have people seated for this, and you certainly may be seated, but if you are able and willing, please stand. Rebecca will play it all the way through, and then we will sing all three verses. Hymn number 339, please rise. Lift up your voice and sing till the infant heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness without us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till the victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn died. Yet with a steady beat have we not weary feet come to the place for which our parents sighed. We have come over the way that the tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out of the glooming past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of the weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou hast put of thy might, lead us in all the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where he met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Good singing, you may be seated. This coming Sunday is Transfiguration of the Lord Sunday, and the Hebrew scripture is taken from Isaiah 58, 1 through 9. Let us listen for God's word. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinances of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments, they delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but do not see? Why humble ourselves, but do you not notice? Look, you serve your own interests on your fast day. You oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and to bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. And God's people said, Here I am. The word of the Lord. Howard Washington Thurman was an African-American author, philosopher, theologian, educator, and civil rights leader. Thurman's theology of radical nonviolence influenced and shaped a generation of civil rights activists, and he was a key mentor to leaders within the movement, a mentor, including Martin Luther King Jr. Two quotes before a prayer. Thurman writes, "It cannot be denied that too often the weight of the Christian movement has been on the side of the strong and the powerful, and against the weak and the oppressed. This despite the gospel." Thurman writes, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Let us pray. We wait. We wait, O God, until at last something of thy strength becomes our strength, something of thy heart becomes our heart, something of thy forgiveness becomes our forgiveness. We wait, O God, we wait. Give me the listening ear. I seek this day the ear that will not shrink from the word that challenges me deeper and deeper consecration and high resolve, the word that lays bare needs that make my own days uneasy, the word that seizes upon every good, decent impulse of my nature, channeling it into paths of healing in the lives of others. So come to us now, O God, as we at the Monte Vista Grove community hear from a friend and a professional living in our own midst. Bless her as she shares her story and ministry through Christ our Lord. Amen. You have read Nanyamka's bio in the Minders, but by way of reminder, Nanyamka is an applied research scientist at the Search Institute in Minnesota. She has worked with adolescents as a high school teacher, a track coach, a youth pastor, a mentor, and a therapist. Nanyamka is also an affiliate professor at Fuller Seminary. She received her PhD in applied developmental psychology. She is deeply committed to social justice, and she does robust research. She has a blast with her 3 sons, Harlan Jr., Dietrich, and Langston, alongside her husband, Reverend Harland of the Interwoven Church, and they've been married 23 years. Please welcome our friend.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm at home. I feel like I'm at home. I am at home. So this is such a wonderful treat to be here with you all this late afternoon, early evening. It's funny. The first time I was in here was in this building. This particular building was many years ago when Harlan was leading Harambe, and we would meet here with the Voyagers, and they always welcomed us with great arms, and it was a wonderful experience. So to be in here, I'm like, oh wow, I've been in here before, and so many of your faces have become such familiar faces to me and my family over the past year. And we are so eternally grateful. For those of you who may not know this aspect of our story, we live here with you all. We have, our family has lowered the median age of the entire Grove, and we are so grateful to be here post-Eaton fire, which was an incredibly tragic event. I don't need to go through that, as you all know. However, we see God's grace and provision through the generosity and the welcoming that you all have made for us. It truly warms us. And I say, lemons to lemonade. This was something that we would have never have wanted to have happen, and yet it did. And as a result, we are here amongst you and have gotten to learn and love with you, and it's been amazing. I could probably do a show of hands who has met my son Dietrich. And I am so happy because he loves all of you, and he sees all of you as like his extended grandparents, just so you know. And so I imagine him looking back on his childhood and being like, I had so many wonderful grandparents and their pets. He loves your pets. And how often do our young people get that kind of experience? So I wanted to open with that, and I'll try to interweave some of that into what I'll be sharing with you all today. As Charles mentioned, I'm a research scientist. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Search Institute. Maybe you know the name Jean Roquepartain. He's a mentor of mine and a colleague as well. Search Institute has been a pioneer in this area called positive youth development. Folks like Peter Benson, if you're familiar with that name, are folks who laid the foundation for an understanding of adolescent development in particular that is much more rich than just this idea that teenagers are wild and crazy and need a lot of help. Because that was the predominant. Y'all probably remember when you were teenagers, people were saying stuff like that about you, like, oh, those teenage years, that you just kind of blink your eye and hope they get through it. Well, the pioneers of whom I am elevated by were the ones to say, you know what, we think differently. And because I graduated from Fuller, I understand the concept of integration. So although our work is not purely Christian per se, however, the foundations of our understanding deeply are. So for me, and my understanding of development comes from the idea that we are all created in the image of God to reflect God's goodness. So if that's the case, then whenever we are astray, that's not a reflection of who we are or how we've been designed, right? Because we were designed to reflect the image of God. We are God's goodness. And so because of that, I said, then if that's the case, young people in their teenage years, their wayward moments, are really in a place of trying to find a way back. If we look at it as they're trying to find a way back, and we as adults, those of us who understand this trajectory, are there to walk alongside them, to shepherd them, to guide them back to an understanding of who they were created to be. And I think that resonates with any young person, whether they are expressly Christian or otherwise, that if we begin to see our young people for the worth, the inherent worth that they have, and to begin to point that back to them, to say, you are good. You are destined for greatness. And to help them to uncover what that means in the midst of their trying to figure it all out, because that is a key component of what adolescence is trying to figure it all out while also thinking you've got it all understood. So it's this like in between, I'm not quite a kid anymore, I'm not quite an adult, I need to figure this out. And how wonderful it is for them to have individuals to be able to point to who they were created to reflect, and whatever that looks like. And so in the work that I've done, particularly around this area of thriving, right? What does it mean to be one's best? What does it mean to live out your life with greatness? And that looks different for each and every one of us. But there are some key components to what that means. And so what I've done in my research is said, okay, there's some key components here of what thriving looks like. But we're all created differently. We don't all travel that same pathway to thriving. And so what I have come to discover is that young people, there's some key ingredient, I'll come back to this, some key aspects of who young people are that are really key, and this is mostly around relationships. But each one is slightly different, and certain groups of kids are different in terms of what it looks like. How does relationships manifest for them? And so that kind of led me into the discovery and the spaces in which I operate my research now, which includes looking at particularly vulnerable and marginalized young people to see what is it about relationships, what is it about our teaching practices, the things that we do for young people, what is it about those, what we call mechanisms or levers? What is it about those things that then lead to the outcomes we want to see? And I've studied this whole swath of outcomes, from sports performance outcomes to well-being to life satisfaction. There's all these good things, and really looked at all of those good things in terms of, well, what helps to move those things into existence for young people. So I could go a lot of different directions here, just so you know. I'm going to put on my research hat, but also speak to you from that integration lens that I hold so dear in my heart. Search Institute is a secular institution, but as I mentioned before, its foundation is deeply rooted in this great understanding of positivity, that there is hope, right? And how do we direct young people to that hope and that purpose and that richness in this concept of thriving? So, relationships. How many of you can do a little hand or you can do it silently, can recall someone in your youth who made an impact? Yeah, and that could have been a teacher, it could have been a coach, could have been a family member, could have been a neighbor. But that person left an impact on you that you can think of them and even raise your hand right now to say, yeah, that person left an impact. However, I know from what I know from my faith that that's biblical. We were designed and created to be connected to one another. From conception, in which we are developed within the womb of our mother, connection is how we grow. It's how we become our best. Because no one was designed to live alone or develop alone. It can't happen. It cannot happen. So we need one another. And young people especially need not just their own peers, because they'll probably tell you, I can't remember. No, they need you to be their best selves. So when I think about relationships, again, I go back to that concept of the Imago Dei. What does that mean? Interconnectedness is a part of our DNA. And so with that understanding, it's like, well, I want to study relationships. I want to study what's going to lead to those outcomes that I'm so excited about, and I want to study relationships. So something that you may not have known, I was a collegiate athlete. I ran track and field for, I was going to say, a lot of years, and then went on and became a coach for about 12 years. And during that time, and as a teacher, is when I deeply experienced relationship with these young people. Began to understand them, listened to them. And that's what led me on the trajectory of, I loved being a teacher, loved being able to disseminate knowledge, but I actually really loved lunchtime when it wasn't about the curriculum and students would come to me and say, hey, Mrs. Redmond, let me tell you about this thing that just happened. Help me to process this. And I love those moments. And I tried my best to make myself as available to the 100 and some odd kids that I taught on a yearly basis. And then they come back after that. So I can't even say if it's 100, probably way more than that in any one year. But try to make myself as available as possible. And then when I left the teaching profession, it made such a lasting impact on me that's where I developed my branch of research, was wanting to understand relationships. Now, I mentioned the sports piece because my dissertation focused on the relational networks, parents, coaches, peers, and its impact on development and its impact on well-being, performance. And so what I wanted to share with you, I want to give you a little bit of that background and then talk to you a little bit about one particular research study that I did as it relates to Black History Month and as I mentioned before, vulnerable youth and marginalized youth. So I did a study in which I looked at I would say, the perspectives of Black youth in school. And my hypothesis was that when they were in a deeply committed relationship with teachers, their teachers provided them with certain ingredients, which I'll come back to, that then impacted how they saw themselves. And all of that kind of falls under an umbrella of what is called culturally responsive teaching. So on one hand, you can think, oh, well, culturally responsive sounds like, okay, they're responsive to culture. However, it goes much deeper than that. For many of our young people, all of our young people, relationships are so key. But for those who are vulnerable and marginalized, it goes a couple level deeper, and it's, do you see me? Do you understand me? Because for many of them, they're experiencing a world that doesn't see them, doesn't understand them. So if they can meet and connect with an adult who sees them, understands them, it makes a huge difference. And what we saw, and I'll go into more detail, but what I saw in my analysis was that when those young people had teachers who understood them along the lines of cultural responsiveness, understood the systems that impacted them, and therefore taught accordingly, along with those deep relationships, that led to thriving. So it's like, what do you put into any bakers in here? What do you put into the mix, right? What do you put into the mix? And then stir it all up, and what does it lead to? And as I said, relationship, but not just any relationship. Not just any relationship. We're talking about what's called developmental relationships. So these are relationships that are directly connected to the positive outcomes. And these relationships have, in what my team has discovered at Search Institute, 5 key ingredients. One of which is one of my favorites as a coach, and if you're a coach or have ever been a teacher, any of that, challenge growth. So challenge growth means not just allowing a kid to be mediocre. It's a smart kid, but if you just allow them just to, float by without really challenging them, you're not helping them, right? So to challenge growth is to hold the bar slightly higher than where they may be at the moment. My teachers in the house may know scaffolding, right? Slightly higher than where they are so that they can push themselves just a bit. And in fact, research has found that this concept of challenging growth, otherwise known as grit, if you're familiar with that word, maybe you know Angela Duckworth, who I consider one of my mentors. I actually worked with her for a few years. Grit has been shown to have a more beneficial component. A young person with grit, more than even IQ. So that means that some of our smartest smarts, if they don't have grit, perseverance, then their levels of success is not nearly what it could be. So that one ingredient, challenge growth, is the adult's ability to push that kid. However, there's a particular way in which that has to be done, which brings up another aspect of relationship: care. Express care is the second dimension I'll talk about. So when you challenge growth and express care, then the kid knows, well, I can try this and I may fail, and that's okay because Miss Betty still cares about me and will still care about me no matter what, right? So that's how those two come together. So you imagine you're in a relationship with a young person. You're thinking, how am I going to get them to point A to point B? Those two pieces are just two of the five, but those are key, right? How do I challenge their growth? How do I express care? How do I make for sure they know that they're loved? Because going back to my theological understanding, my faith understanding, is that when we know we are loved, when we know we belong, the sky's the limit, right? The sky's the limit. So the third one I'll talk about is, because this is connected to this, is provide support. As I mentioned, how do you help elevate, right? So you can't just hold the bar. Sometimes some kids need a little push, right? And what does that look like? Sometimes it looks tangible, like literally like, or sometimes it looks financial. Sometimes it looks like providing a roof or a meal. It can look so many different ways. But when you know a young person, when you are experiencing them, you can get a vibe, you can get an understanding of what type of support they need and to intercede. Sometimes it's a prayer. Sometimes it's a phone call. It depends on the kid. And that's where in the work that I do, so aside from research, which is really fun, I also get to work with youth-serving organizations. In fact, just today, right before I was running a little late, is I've been working with a basketball foundation to train coaches on how to do relationships well, because that's what they want to know, is how do I do this well? Because I know a whole lot about basketball, but I'm not really quite sure if I'm connected with these kids. And so helping them to know, like, how do you enter in to get to know these kids so that you can challenge their growth, express care, and provide support in a way that makes sense for them, okay? The other ingredient is expand possibilities. That means opening their world to what's possible. Many of you probably landed on your life career, the work that you would do because someone said, hey, did you ever think about doing this? Have you ever considered this? And maybe you had, but maybe you hadn't considered that. So when they took you along for a shadow visit, or they said, hey, I want you to come and check this out with me, suddenly you're like, whoa, that's expand possibilities. Is showing a young person, again, going back, as I mentioned, to those young people who are marginalized, who don't have access to these things, expanding possibilities could look like getting them out of their city, taking them to the beach for the first time. These types of things are expanding their horizons so that they can imagine what's possible. Particularly when you've got those other pieces in the mix as well, right? So you've expressed care, you're providing support, you're challenging growth, you're expanding possibilities. All of these pieces are coming together for a robust relationship between you and the young person. And so if I go back to that research that I was telling you about, when those key ingredients were there, these young people not only did better in school, they saw themselves and their potential in really positive ways. They saw their life as more satisfying. They saw the potential for their life, their purpose was much more rich than the young people who didn't have that element. Because that's the other piece of the equation, is not all young people have that. So what happens to the ones who don't? Well, they just don't see life the same way. And so for me, like, I love that research. I love that research because it tells me a lot, but I'm also, as I may have heard, I'm applied. How do we take this and make it make sense? So as I mentioned, the sports folks that I work with, I also work with a lot of teachers and youth leaders who are thinking, well, how do I do this? How do I design my curriculum? How do I design what I do on a day-to-day basis to reach and meet these particular goals? And it's relationship. And part of that aspect of relationship is we say, it starts with some of your own internal work. For some people, it means no longer seeing adolescents as this, teenagers, and instead seeing them for the potential that they have, the richness that they have. And to that fifth ingredient, learning how to share power with them. Here's what's crazy. In some of our research, share power is one of the hardest for adults to wrap their mind around. And I think that's because from a values perspective, adults have always kind of seen themselves as like, okay, I'm above you. And so what I say goes. I can hear my own parents like, what I say goes. And the problem with that, because what you say does go, it's true. But if that's all they're hearing, then they think, okay, well, what can I say that adds value? My voice doesn't matter. But when the flip happens, and instead of what I say goes, the question is, okay, let me hear what you have to say. Not that I'll necessarily change my mind, but I'm curious to hear what you may be thinking. Maybe we can collaborate. Maybe we can together come up with a solution to this problem. If we think about what's been happening after the Eaton fire, I had an opportunity to speak, and what I shared was that as we think about rebuilding and recovery, how often do we think about young people? Not just thinking about young people, because some people are like, oh, we think about young people, so we built this park. And then the teenagers especially are like, there's nothing at that park for us. You didn't ask us what we wanted. So then they see it as like, oh, well, the teenagers don't see themselves as being a part of a community. But when they help shape and design, not only are they a part of the community, they're part of the designers of the community because they are the community. And when all of those are long gone, they will be the heartbeat of the community. And they will get to raise up a new generation. So if we learn how to share power, and part of the sharing power, for all the teachers in the room, is to help them to know, like, okay, what's your lane and what's not your lane, right? Because they're still learning. And I've sat in many spaces where some people are like, okay, we're just going to let the young people just go. I say, yeah, but if you let them go rogue, they will go rogue. And before you know it, there's like, okay, we're going to turn Altadena into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. And they've got designs. It was like, this is what was like, okay, let's be more realistic here. That chocolate's going to melt. So that's where they need that introduction of like the what if. And that's where your wisdom is so important. The wisdom of those who have been there, who can gently guide and redirect. That's what it means to share the power, is to not just lead, but to allow you to walk alongside, to be together. And that's what helps a young person to not only understand their worth and their value, but to learn about the worth and value of others. Because again, all of these experiences, all the things that I'm describing are all ingredients that developmentally stick with you and help you to move into your next stage, future stages of development with strength, to thrive, to be your best self. When young people have those relationships that are so rich, that's what happens. And so often I reflect on my own childhood and my own development. And my parents did the best that they could, but I didn't have a super rich network in terms of being raised in Monte Vista Grove, right? Of so many people who can offer so many great things. And as I said before, you have all been so great in welcoming to my kiddos. Probably don't, well, I mean, Dietrich talks a lot, so you got to be prepared for that. But nonetheless, with patience and grace, you've welcomed them and guided them. And I feel deeply that all young people deserve that level of care and love. And it's not easy, because in our generation, and I'll speak for myself as a mom raising 3 kids, there's a part of us as parents today that feels like we've got it all together, right? We've got it all together, we can do it. We don't need any help, or maybe we're also silently crying, oh my gosh, I need so much help, and not knowing where to get it. But when we understand, so we teach young people young that interdependence is far greater than independence. I don't think we teach that enough. Yes, we want people to be able to do things on their own, but we want them to be able to say, I need some help. And that's not easily done in a society that tells people that you should have it all together. You should get it. But sometimes you don't. And when you don't, and then you begin to suffer in silence, it becomes really hard. And so my work doesn't go super deep into parenting. That research is my own research as a parent. It's how then do these other networks work together to build up a young person? The parent is always critical. As I mentioned before, my dissertation did include parents in the mix. I'll just share that. What we found was that when a parent is regulated and can control their inner self, that their young person did better. And it's interesting because I remember when I came across, I was like, whoa. So much of the research says that when a young person reaches a certain age, that they no longer need their parents, that they want to distance themselves. And you see that in adolescence where there is a distancing. I'm trying to be an adult, but they're still watching, they're still listening, they're still picking up on all of those key things that you're putting down as a parent. And again, all of that kind of helping to form a robust network of relationships to help young people. So as it relates to Black History Month, so often, well, I also did a chapter actually that looked at the trajectory and history of not just psychology, but positive psychology. And at one point, there was sort of this view that all kids are the same. And so we began to just kind of say blanketly, like, all kids need this, all kids need this. And it, like, yes, but the nuance. So we are in, I would say, in the research age of the nuance. People, I'm not saying anything new when I say, oh, relationship. Everyone's like, yes, yeah, that makes sense. Duh, you didn't discover anything new there. It's like, but what part of relationships? And that's where that element that I mentioned, that culturally responsive piece, introducing that to the mix is where you're kind of like, oh, because is that the same for every kid? Is that the same? In some cases, yes, but it's more important for young people who have seen themselves as not quite like everybody else. Black youth in particular, who, when they were impacted by the death of George Floyd, things like that, going back even further, Black rights or civil rights movements, Black Power movement, those were times where Black youth were trying to say, we want to be seen, we want you to understand us, and to see us as equal to you. And so in that branch of research, I said, I want to help them to be seen. because I think about myself and how much I wanted to be seen and understood and valued, not just because of the color of my skin, but for all the aspects of who I am and how I presented myself. So with that said, I'm trying to look at the clock, make sure I'm not going over. And I wanted to also give you all an opportunity if you have any questions for me. Yes.
I think I can. Can you hear me? No. All right, never mind. I know you're fine. I'm trying. Here I am. I thought I'd ask you, I think most folks here in this room have not had a chance to worship at Interwoven on a Sunday morning. Yeah. And I wondered if you would say to them what happens when the pastor invites the community to greet one another. How did they do that?
Yes, it's a beautiful, and I'll give you a little bit of backstory, because as if you all have met Harlan, I'm sure. He's a deeply relational guy, right? Like, it's like, okay, I study relationships, and my husband is like so relational, like on the nth degree. And so it's actually a mentor of his when he was in junior college, who had this way of greeting their class, and he has adopted that, and this is how we greet one another at Interwoven. We say, "It's good to see you," with the response being, "It's good to be seen." It's good to be seen. And so, yeah, that's just our way of greeting one another. And but it comes from him. It comes from, again, a deeply relational guy who truly values wisdom and wisdom of elders in particular. So this was his professor who taught him that one. Yeah.
One of the life-changing things that happened to me as an adolescent and late adolescent was being asked to be a camp counselor.
Yeah.
And that really had an impact on me, that I had responsibility to take care of these kids that were not much younger than I was.
Yeah.
Of those 5 categories, is that support, or is that a combination of a couple of those things?
Yeah, it depends on which part are you talking about. Your entryway into being a camp counselor, or what you provided those kiddos?
Both. I was flabbergasted to be asked.
Yeah.
I felt empowered when I was there that I was a leader
Yeah.
in this camp. Of all people, I was doing this.
I love that. There's a lot going on in that one. One, it would be for someone, it was sharing power. So bringing an adolescent who probably hadn't shepherded kids before into a space. So in some churches, you have maybe the adolescents or young people or help leading the kids service, things like that. So giving access. And some may have said, like, I don't know if we can do this, but someone else kind of stepping in and being like, no, let's give them a try. Let's give him a try, and let's give him, hopefully they gave you what you needed to succeed. And then for you, as that young person I'm sure we can go around all the different stories of how you may have done all of those things, provide care, support. When you're a camp counselor, like that's a heavy weight. I was a youth pastor for a few years, and we didn't have any teenage youth leaders. It was me at, I think I was maybe in my late 20s, early 30s, who was doing that. And it was transforming for me. But unfortunately, we don't tend to let young people lead like that. But if you can, and you can succeed at it, it opens up your mind to what's possible.
Yeah, it was life-changing for me. Betty.
Can you talk a little bit, just in maybe simple terms, what kind of research methodologies you use to do your analysis? Is it qualitative, quantitative, whatever?
Yeah, so when I was quantitatively trained, so I did a path analysis, as I mentioned, those key ingredients of relational support, the parents, the peers, the adolescents. So for all you statistics folks, a path analysis, basically I took the survey methodology, gathered all that data, put each of them into sort of, it's a path analysis, almost like a structural equation model. So I put them together based on the survey factors, put them in I say put them in the analytical, but the math machine, but did the math there, and then looked at, well, how are these main components, how are they correlated with these other aspects? And that's when we began to draw lines to see, okay, where are the connections? The connections show us where the correlations are happening. So it was a correlational research in this case. And that's how I was originally trained, but since then I would consider myself mixed methods, which is one who is trained in both quantitative and qualitative. And so I like both. And maybe you heard in my bio, I was a marriage and family therapist for a while. And I found that qualitative is basically listening to people, doing interviews or focus groups and listening to what people say, and then analyzing what they say based on some hypotheses and criteria. And so listening to people was like, oh, I like this. This is fun. This is kind of putting back on my therapist hat. So now I consider myself a mixed methodologist. So my research often connects both the quantitative and the qualitative. I use the qualitative to inform me more deeply about what I may have seen quantitatively. So I'm like, okay, this is what this is saying, but I wonder if I then go back to people and ask them these questions, are they saying that their experience is what I've been seeing in the quantitative? So yeah.
Catherine, you have a question?
And it's a loaded one.
Oh, let's go.
Many cultures, especially black culture, believe whipping their children is the way to bring them up. I was whipped. I whipped my kids. We call it whooping. You're going to get a whooping when you did something wrong. And it may have been that you ate a cookie that you weren't supposed to eat until after dinner. I never understood that. And then they use the Bible to justify it.
Yeah.
So, and I believed all of that until I took psychology. And I realized that it was just wrong. You don't hit people, period, especially people you love. And so I want to know if you agree with me on that or disagree, and if you disagree, how do we change that? And it's not just black culture, it's culture, many cultures, but particularly black culture. Now, I always say it's because, you know, the slave owner beat the slaves, and the slaves then beat their children, and so it's just a part of who we are. So can you tell us something on that?
Yes. Thank you, Catherine. Whew. The idea of whooping, spanking, hitting is one that's born out of this idea of compliance, compliant-based raising of a kid. I'm trying to get you to do what I want you to do, be who I want you to be. And our natural inclination as human beings is to reject that. Neurobiologically, so I'll go there first. Neurobiologically, when a child is physically harmed or physically hurt, let's say, physically hurt, that elicits particular neurosignals in their brain. And if you, mom and dad, are the one hurting me, then you are not safe. Although you may get, and I will say, you will likely get from most kids compliant behavior. You will get the outcome that you may want. I don't want you to eat a cookie anymore. You're not supposed to do that. You will get the results you want. But is your child then becoming who you want them to be? And I know many people were spanked, but on to become great people. I don't want to say that that's not the case, but you are rewiring one's brain to make it more likely that they will not be the great person you want them to be. It's more for them to overcome, to become great, to thrive. So we could say some of us have made a mistake, or some of us, maybe that was the trajectory. And that's where the grace of God comes in, the mercy of God for so many of us. So when people say that, I'm like, well, I'm so glad God interceded on your behalf for your child's sake. But I also recognize, as someone raising 3 kids, that sometimes you just need them to stay in line, don't wander in the street. But what I have found to be most effective is to be able to get down. Here, I can still bend. To get down to their eye level, to connect with them. Why did you eat that cookie? And not a, why did you eat that cookie? Because that's going to go into a shame response. It's going to lead them to be defensive. Say, why? Mommy, I was hungry. I was waiting, and the cookie's so good. Okay, I get it.
I have a question
Yeah.
here
Where's
in the
that?
back, way back here.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah,
That's Nancy back
yeah,
there.
yeah, I'm one of the many Nancys here. What would you say are some of your biggest challenges in working with adolescents?
Ooh. Honestly, I'll say what one of my biggest challenges is, and then I'll share what one of the biggest challenges in talking with other people. My biggest challenge is the adults. Like, straight up. Like, it's getting to the young person, circumnavigating some of the pain points of their families and things like that. That can be a challenge. But what I hear a lot of people say in terms of the challenge is what I would call defensiveness to adult help. So it's like, they don't want to hear from me. That's usually what it sounds like from the adult perspective. It's like, they don't want to listen to me. They don't care. They're apathetic. They're not motivated. This doesn't matter to them. And usually what that says to me is that young person has experienced trauma, loss, rejection, to the point that what they do is protect themselves. I can't let you in out of fear that if I do, you're going to leave me, hurt me, abandon me, all of these next. So our psychological inclination, which I always say is our God wiring, says, nope. I can't let you in. But even when those kids who are saying, I can't let you in, there's always an entry point. There's always an entry point. Because although there's this point of them saying, I don't want to let you in, that there's those opportunities, those small opportunities. And it may be more work on the part of the adult. I tell folks that they're like, these kids, they don't want. I say, this kid has had extreme trauma. So they do not trust anyone. However, they love cookies. They love animals. They love something. And that could be an entry point. However, that entry point may have to be over and over and over and over and over again.
We have a lot of school teachers here today, and here is one. Suzette has a question or a comment?
I would just love to hear your take on your church and the church broad,
Yeah.
and how you're seeing your research affecting students, young people, choosing not to be a part of church. And maybe you can help us know what's going on in your particular church, in the Black community, on what's being successful, because we all here wish all the young people would connect
Yeah.
on a spiritual basis.
Yeah. It goes back to that concept of share power. I truly think that young people have to be, we've got to listen to them and then have them walk alongside us in designing how we do church. I won't speak for Interwoven because we don't have a super robust teenage population yet. But when I was a youth pastor, what we did was, it wasn't my church per se, so I didn't necessarily prescribe how they did this, but this is what that particular church did, was we had a very separate youth space. So when the adults were in adult church, the teenagers were in teenage church, I guess you would say. And I think they grew spiritually, but then when they outgrew the teenage church, then we were asking them to go to the adult church, and the adult church was very different from the youth church. So on one hand, you'd be like, oh, well, they should get used to the adult church. It's like, well, no, because they're telling you that this fulfills a particular aspect of what they want, which is sometimes is more deeper connection. And part of what we did in designing was after every sermon, they got together and they processed what that meant in the moment. So while they were there, the second half was we called table groups. And they got to connect and process and connect with one another, connect with the youth leader. They did all that while their parents were in upper service. So I think that what I also know, Suzette, to your point, is they have to be invited in. And young people today are deeply connected to a social justice gospel. It's because they are seeing, you think about, these are young people who have been through COVID, who are now going through immigration raids and all sorts of things that are happening at a more global level, multiple wars, things in which make them feel like they have no control. You point them to a God who cares. A God who cares about not just them and who may be privileged position, but to care about the ones who are hurt, harmed, and in war-torn environments also. And they may look at you like, how do you say that? Why wouldn't God just end it all? So, because God created you and created your generation to be the ones to do something different, to thwart the direction. So helping to point them to a gospel in which they can see themselves as being an active participant in. But I'm not saying that as an aside gospel. That is the gospel. And so I think helping them to experience a relational gospel, a social justice gospel, and how they can partner in that. And sometimes it means doing things that are very different than what traditional church looks like.
We have many Nancys here. We also have many Toms here. And I'm going to give this Tom the second to the last question.
Lord have mercy, indeed. No, thank you very, very much. The other day in the LA Times, there was an article. I didn't read it in its entirety, but the headline particularly struck me. It was film school. And the comment is that film instructors are finding that, quote unquote, younger people are unable to sit through a lengthy movie. I thought about my own growing up days. Most of it was much slower.
Yeah.
Kids these days, this incredible neurological attack, and they're vulnerable to it. But the question about they couldn't sit still in a longer movie.
Yeah, you're touching on a couple different things. And well, one, I'm curious, because I'm going to presume it means that they just can't watch the whole movie. They can't sustain focus for the whole movie. Some of the things that we're learning, particularly about attention and focus, is that I'm so impressed with how well you all have sat very attuned. Again, I'm used to younger people and looking out and seeing the wiggles and things like that. So I was like, wow, they are very poised. I hope to be like you all someday.
We have been up there a lot, so.
I love it. But we have found that, because I think there's two parts to parts that come into my mind for what you're saying, Tom. We have found that for many of us, movement helps the focus. So sitting in a movie theater for someone who's 20-something, I'm not sure how old the film students are, but imagine they're in their 20s possibly, is still difficult because they need to move to understand and to learn. I've learned this about my Dietrich. Y'all have met my Dietrich. He's got to move.
Gotta move.
He's got to move. And when he's able to move, there's so much that comes out of him when he's able to move. However, I think the other part of that is sustained focus, which is in part because of the rapid firing of neurological wiring that's happening as a result of scroll culture. Being able to see these quick snippets of TikTok and everything else that has people like, okay, get me to the point, get me to the point, get me to the point. So the slow buildup isn't quite there. And I don't know if the entry point is to use media to increase one's focus in media. I believe, because again, I study sports and things like that, that movement, music, helps to get young people there. So being able, and you know, those of you who are school teachers, maybe you don't know, but in your era at least, there was a high emphasis on music and PE. Kids aren't getting that today. These are some of the first things that have been cut in our educational system. That's a problem. So we're not teaching kids to move anymore. We're not giving them access to music and instruments. We're then asking them to sit and study. And by the way, it's not increasing the outcomes. The outcomes aren't getting better. So some of what we need to do is go back to the basics. And although, yes, like I said, my kids are guilty too. They love screens, but they would much rather be with your pets, and much rather be with you, or be with me, or be outside and doing all these other things. They're like, all right, I guess I'll do this because I don't have anything else to do. And so when you give them access, especially when they're as young as like mine are, you give them access to these things and you give them opportunity and they're met with great relationships. They would much rather do that than to do the other things. And so I know for many, I'll say for myself, when my kids were young, when COVID had happened, I was an anti-screen person. And then I had to finish a dissertation and my husband had to finish seminary. And we were like, well, what's a little bit of screen gonna do? And they learned a lot from these screens. I'm like, whoa. My oldest, he's more of a hermit. You're not gonna see him as often. But he started speaking in Russian and German.
Wow.
And he was like 3 or 4 years old. He's pretty exceptional. And I was like, because he was playing these games on the screen. So it's, how do you take the good that may be in the screen, minimize it, meaning it doesn't have to be at the numbers in which kids are experiencing them, and then couple them with more opportunities. Let's go play.
Remember Robert Redford couldn't hit the target unless he moved in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? I just can't get, I'm dating myself.
That's a good one.
Is there a last question or comment? Another Tom. This Tom here? Yeah, okay, yeah. The voice of God, here he is.
Nan, I wish I had heard you 70 years ago. When I was a young pastor working with teenagers, I didn't know what I was doing, but by the grace of God, I survived if they did not.
Yeah.
Your presentation made me think of Father Greg Boyle,
Of course.
and I wonder if you had studied his ministry, and if so, how did it inform your work?
Yes. Well, I don't know. Y'all all know Harlan. Maybe you knew or did not. Maybe you're not. That Father Boyle is one of Harlan's mentors. if you were at, like I always tell people this, because Father Boyle is this person, and Harlan is equally this, humble person. But Father Boyle was at Harlan's ordination, prayed over him very quietly, unassuming, but he reminds me of Santa Claus. So if you know who he is, then you know that. And I remember, like, my first time meeting him was he was a keynote speaker when Harlan was the director at Harambe, and I sat next to him, and it was a moment when the children's choir came up and began to sing, and Father Boyle looked at me, and I looked at him, and he started to cry, and he grabbed my knee, and I said, I know, because there's something about when you're experiencing young people and seeing their vitality, their life, and the potential, it brings you to tears. Father Boyle, I remember the first book I read of his, which I think was probably his first book, was Tattoos on the Heart. And I love the analogy that he shares of, as he saw his work, and I've seen my work as well, as one who, when the lights are all out and the room is dark, and the person is trying their best, fumbling through. So imagine a young person fumbling through life at times. Father Boyle says, you hold the flashlight to point them to where they need to go. And that's how I've seen my work, my ministry, my life, as being one who, when folks are in the darkness, when they're in the places of they're not sure or they're deeply uncertain, that I'm one who holds a flashlight to give them direction, to give them the space. And I'll just add to his understanding is that when I can, I'll go and I'll hold their hand while I hold the flashlight and walk with them.
Nanyamka, we want to thank you so much for this presentation. Really appreciate your blessing us. Not only your friendship, but your willingness to live with us for these many months. So we are so glad to have you. We are going to sing We Shall Overcome. An old white guy like me can't lead this. Come on, Catherine, get up here. You don't have to get up, just sit. And what? 379, and please rise.
I don't need the book.
Take the hand of your neighbor, and how do you hold a hymn book and take a hand?
No,
You can't do it.
You want me to call out the words?
I want you to just call out the words, sing it any way you wish.
But
You're in charge, Catherine.
you all hold the hands. I want that. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Ooh, deep in my, I do believe. I do. We shall overcome. Come. We shall live in peace. Shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in someday. overcome. So we are not afraid. Not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. Someday, oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. Now, this is the reason we shall overcome. God will see us through. God will see us through. God will see us through. God will see us today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall free us through.
Amen. Amen. On March the 1st, the Interwoven Church, Harlan's Church, is going to be chartered on that day. So if you can make it, yes, come on down, get some Presbyterians down there. Word for next week, Tom?
Skip Baker, Dr. Skip Baker will be speaking on the neurological basis of adolescent behavior. His area of work, he's a psychiatrist who works with adolescents, specifically with ADHD, but it'll be a way of introducing Skip to the community. Yeah, thanks. He's not a psychologist. He's a pediatrician who specializes in, yeah.
Go in God's peace, friends. Is there a dinner tonight? Yes, Kathy?
There is a dinner tonight, but there are no tables arranged